Hi, my name is Allison, and for my literature review and final presentation, I decided to do gender roles in leadership, more specifically, how these gender roles show up in areas like healthcare and politics and higher education. When it came time for me to decide what I wanted to do this assignment over, I kind of was automatically drawn to doing something about gender, and I think that this interest was sparked in me when I took sociology my first semester here at Methodist. And we watched this YouTube video that really highlighted for me the fact that a lot of times when these discussions regarding gender inequality or the gender pay gap are taking place, people don't really have a lot of facts to back up their claims, it seems like. And a lot of it is just based out of opinion. So I was interested to do some research for myself and see if gender impacts leadership roles within healthcare, especially, as well as other areas of the workforce. The first article that I reviewed was Women in Leadership and the Bewildering Glass Ceiling by Chris Burns and his research team. And so some of the major findings that I have highlighted over here is that there's no correlation between the lack of representation and the attainment of education or qualification. Basically, what I'm trying to say by this is that it's not as if women aren't receiving degrees or that they're not qualified. They are, in fact, qualified. And if you look, I have more than 45% of medical school graduates are women, as cited by Chris Burns and his team. And so when you think about that, it just is a very interesting actual number that you can grasp. Secondly, leadership positions that women are selected for often hinder any opportunity to pursue advancement within their profession. So a lot of the times, when you think of someone who has these goals to be a leader, be a CEO, in an advanced position, they have these goals of advancing through this career ladder, right? And a lot of the times when women have an opportunity to get a leadership position, it kind of puts a cap on that potential, and there's not a lot of direct places for them to go following that position. And over here in orange, kind of a big takeaway finding is that women earn bachelor and graduate or professional degrees at an equivalent or higher rate than men, yet are promoted to leadership positions such as CEO at only 50% of the rate of men in their profession. So I just think that again is just a really interesting finding. Strengths for this article was that it was consistent with the data selected. It was really easy to interpret and understand. It all just made sense. It also provided examples of ways to achieve equal representation in the gender in the workforce, which I think just made it a strength, because instead of just proposing this problem and allowing the audience to speculate about what we should do about it, it actually gave some ideas, which I think is good. And a weakness within this article was that it only presented data from outside sources that supported their hypothesis or their claim that there was these invisible barriers, such as the glass ceiling, that prevent women from attaining adequate representation. The second article that I reviewed was Boys Will Be Superintendents by Moranto and his team from 2018. The major findings within this article was that when there was a transition into a more professional, bureaucratic curriculum type of academics, this somehow correlated into replacing females with males when it came to leadership positions. And there's a speculation within this article about how this is closely tied to the bond between academics and athletics, and just the idea that it is more beneficial for a school to have kind of a 2-for-1. Like, you can have a basketball coach who's a male and also have him be in a leadership position within the school system. The second major finding was that empirical research actually identifies female superintendents to be associated with better academic performance. So I think that this, again, is just interesting when you consider that they are so underrepresented that they actually are associated with good outcomes. So it makes you question what's really going on there. And then lastly, 90% of elementary school teachers are women, yet only 66% are school principals. And again, just another numerical piece of evidence and numerical finding that I really think kind of strengthens just this idea that there is something about gender and these stereotypes of what women are capable of that prevents them from being able to truly have leadership roles. in the workforce. And the strength from this article was that it utilized credible sources and quantitative data to supplement the claims. And the weakness was that it kind of got lost in that argument that the lack of representation is so closely tied to the value of male athletic coaches. I think that they could have just discussed more aspects of this if they didn't spend so much time about that. And also the author included his own self-observations to support his claims, which I think was just kind of a weakness. The last article that I reviewed was Leadership Diversity and the Effects of Counter-Stereotypical Thinking on the Support for Women Leaders Under Uncertainty by Rainsley de Mora and his research team in 2018. The major findings from this study were that gender role congruous, sensitive leaders are preferred over a strong leadership style, which basically within this study is broken down to mean that people seem to prefer, at least participants in this study, seem to prefer people who followed those gender roles that, are expected out of women. Yet at the same time, it's interesting to point out that these gender roles are often, like we discussed earlier, are what prevent women from climbing that professional career ladder. So again, the last takeaway over here, women leaders that are role incongruent are penalized because they threaten the gender hierarchy. And yet that's just because they are doing those, male-linked characteristics, and it is a threat to the gender hierarchy. Strengths within this article is that they conducted a unique, multifaceted study independent of others. It was all their own study they created, and they challenged participants after the study to challenge their stereotypes and their decision-making processes. The weaknesses, I think, is that it included a factor within it talking about certainty versus uncertainty, just kind of regarding the state of the world around us. And these two options kind of yielded different results with minimal exploration as to why. And I think it would have been beneficial for them to explain some of those. For my healthcare interview, I interviewed a registered nurse. She's a new registered nurse, just graduated from Methodist in December, which I have listed over here as one of her weaknesses. She's admittedly biased as a proud Methodist graduate, and she has limited experience in the field. But her strengths were that personal anecdotes were provided to emphasize her perspective, and she was able to provide evidence that negated the idea that women are not provided opportunities. So I think that it's just interesting to have kind of those counter arguments in there. And the major findings with our interview is that while there is representation of women within the hospital here in Omaha, Nebraska at Methodist, it isn't necessarily equal. And so she said that I encounter female leaders at the hospital frequently. To be honest, I feel more comfortable when my patient's physician is female because I assume that it will be a better communication experience, which I put over here for this takeaway. That ties closely into Moranto's finding that female leaders tend to be better equipped to provide effective instructional leadership. So I just find that to really tie into everything, that we've already seen that there is benefits to having women in leadership positions. The gaps in this literature was that they only, two of the three only presented data from sources that supported their claims, and that there is a deficit, that being that there's a deficit in representation of women in leadership. Also, the data largely revolves around qualitative and self-observation, and again, just those two out of the three. And then they had a disregard for outliers within all three of these. The literature review failed to include data regarding women who are in positions of power and how they got there. And so I just think that counter arguments really should be addressed within research proposals. And, you shouldn't just leave it open for the audience to speculate about that. I think that it just could have strengthened the article to at least incorporate those, as well as additional questions to the questionnaire, which is part of the first study, that were directed towards participants who maybe felt that there are more reasons other than just gender gap and gender linked characteristics and stereotypes as to why there's this underrepresentation. And then these are my references. Thank you for listening.